Hello and welcome to this BioProcess International Ask the Expert webcast. I'm your host, Leah Rosen, the online editor for BioProcess International. Before we get started, just a couple of notes. This webcast is being recorded and will be made available for replay in the multimedia section of our website. We've muted the audio lines, but we welcome you to type in your questions for our speaker in the chat window on your screen. After the presentation, we will begin the question and answer portion, and I will ask our speaker your questions from the chat window. Your questions in the chat window will only be visible to myself and our speaker. So thank you for joining us today. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Sibylle Heidelberger from SCIEX.
Thank you very much. So good morning and thank you for attending this webinar on routine methodologies for identifying low-level attributes. I'm going to start off by defining what is a low-level attribute before speaking briefly about peptide mapping and why it's a valuable tool. I'll then focus on the X500B QTOF system where I acquired some data using swath acquisition workflow and showing why using swath not only provides unbiased complete characterization of a sample, but how it is capable of identifying low abundant attributes within the sample, and I will show you an example of such data using a NIST MAB digest. So what are low-level attributes and why are they so important? It's simple. They are anything found in low abundance and can include low-level post-translational modifications, degradation products, or even host cell proteins. They're specific towards the biologic that you're interested in, so this is why we define it by a very vague definition. But their importance is determined once they are characterized and identified, to determine their safety and how this affects the safety and efficacy of the final product. And then this in turn determines whether or not they actually need to be monitored. So one way to monitor them is through the use of peptide mapping of the biologic. Peptide mapping has been recognized by the ICH under Q6B guidelines as a methodology to be used for routine analysis. Well, why is that? It's considered to be vital for biologics because it can confirm primary sequence and structure of proteins. It is also able to confirm post-translational modifications such as glycosylations and oxidations and deamidations, and it can identify sequence variants and disulfide bond locations. And all the while it's doing this, it may also identify any of these at low level and all with one injection. So as I mentioned, for the data, I used the new completely redesigned benchtop X500B QTOF system. Now this QTOF was specifically designed with routine biologics in mind. And the system comes with newly designed and easy-to-use SCIEX OS software for acquisition and BioPharmaView software for routine batch processing. Altogether, this system can identify and acquire batch analysis for intact, subunit, antibody-drug conjugates, as well as do DAR calculations. And then, of course, it can do peptide mapping from both data-dependent acquisition and the data-independent swath acquisition. So this results in a complete routine solution for biologics all in one box. So why am I talking about swath versus the traditional data-dependent acquisition for peptide mapping? Because simply, nothing hides from swath. Unlike data-dependent acquisition, where you set limits and thresholds, swath acquires TOF-MS data and MSMS data across the entire mass range of interest. This creates a digital record then, which can be interrogated long after the sample has been acquired. It also allows you to decrease analysis time, as I will show in my example when I compare a 25-minute LC run to an 80-minute LC run, and I can still maintain the data quality of the TOF-MS and the MSMS data. And finally, it also allows for generic methods to be used for multiple biologics, which reduces the amount of time required for method development. So how does swath work? Swath creates windows across your entire mass range of interest and allows these ions through from each window consecutively to obtain MSMS data across the entire mass range and across your entire LC run. The speed of acquisition and the detection from the instrument means that you can get high quality data that can be used easily for relative quantitation down to those low abundant attributes. Swath balances speed with sensitivity to obtain high quality, high resolution data of everything. Remember, nothing hides from swath. So on the X500B system, it's very easy to set up swath acquisition in the SCIEX OS software. Simply selecting swath in the new method window automatically opens up both a TOF-MS and a TOF-MS-MS tab. Then you can set a generic window for the swath by setting up your start mass and stop mass, and then setting up your window width and the accumulation time of your windows. Of course, if you want more specific methods, we do have a variable window calculator which can be used. And then the table from that can be copied and pasted right into the SCIEX OS. So getting to the example of sample data that I've got here. We've taken a NIST digest and we've run it on 2 different gradients. So we have a 25-minute gradient here using a 5-centimeter column and an 80-minute gradient with a 15-centimeter column. Of course, the chromatography looks a little different for both of them. However, what I'm going to show you is that the data that we acquire from the 25-minute window is just as good as the data that we've acquired from the 80-minute. Now, I don't have a lot of time to go through more than one example here, but I am happy for you to contact me and I can go through more data or we can actually discuss things. But what I decided to do here was to take an example of a deamidation. And what we've got here is on this side, we have the 25-minute window, and this is the TOF-MS data for the non-deamidated versus the deamidated form. And then we have the MS-MS data from the non-deamidated versus the deamidated form underneath. And what I've got is a comparison between the 25-minute run and the 80-minute run. And what we can see here is both in the case of the TOF-MS data as well as the MS-MS data, I am still getting really great high-resolution data regardless of using my 25-minute run versus the 80-minute run. So just briefly, as I've said, we didn't really have very much time to go through a lot of things. But I'm hoping that I was able to define and explain what we're discussing with respect to low-level attributes and how vital they are for routine biologics to ensure the safety and efficacy of the product. And how peptide mapping, which is established as a routine workflow for identification of primary structure and post-translational modifications under the SCIEX Q6B guidelines, can be used to do the low-level attribute analysis. And with the examples that I've given, how the X500B QTOF with the swath acquisition can be an ideal tool for the routine peptide mapping. The reason that we're looking at the swath acquisition is because you get that unbiased digital record, which allows for reinterrogation of the data even after the sample has been acquired. You can go back to that data months later and still have a look at it, and it will contain everything that was in that sample. As well, for my example of my 25-minute versus 80-minute run, how you can actually increase your throughput without compromising the data quality. So you can reduce your LCMS times if you have a lot of samples that you have to get through. And then even further, because we're not compromising that data quality, we can look at those low abundant attributes and still maintain the high resolution, high data quality from your TOF-MS and MS-MS data, even on those short LC runtimes. So I'd just like to thank Rich Rogers at Just Biotherapeutics for the NIST Digest and Sean McCarthy at SCIEX for his help working on this. And before we get to the question and answer period, we do have another polling question. Are you currently doing or looking to implement a MAM assay by LCMS? Okay. And I'd like to thank you for your time this morning. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And if not, if you think of something later, please feel free to contact me.
Thanks, Sabile. So we do have a first question. Do you think it's necessary to have high-resolution MSMS for these type of methods, or would it be sufficient to just use the accurate mass MS1 for identification?
When it comes to the identification and characterization, the MSMS data is really important in order to be able to identify things. Doing screening afterwards would be perfectly fine, but you do need to identify and characterize things prior to, so you do need that MSMS data. And especially in case there's anything like post-translational modifications that are occurring or there's localization of those, you do sort of need to get all of that information before you go, before you actually can just vaguely use a routine method just on the MS1 level. So.
And how long does it take to set up a swath method? And can the method be transferred easily between instruments?
Oh, it's very quick to set up the swath method. I'd say basically 1 or 2 minutes just to set up a method. If you're doing the variable window, it takes a little bit longer, but even then, I'd say maximum 5 minutes to set up. And the methods can be transferred between X500B instruments. Yes, and that's easy enough to do. You just take the method, copy it over, and paste it.
And do I have to define what modifications I'm looking for before I set up the method?
No, that's one of the key things about using a swath acquisition. You don't need to know anything about the sample before you set it up. Everything that happens is in the processing of the sample, and that's where you may define what you're actually looking for. But when it comes to the acquisition, you do not have to worry about anything, and that's what makes it so unbiased.
Okay. If anyone has any other questions, go ahead and type them in the chat window. Looks like, can you kindly explain about the MAM assay?
Right. So MAM stands for multi-attribute methodology. And what this is actually looking at is if you've already characterized your product and you're actually looking for specific either low-level or high-level attributes that you need to monitor, this is a way of actually using the mass spec to monitor them. So you could set up a method just to screen for those attributes that you need to monitor throughout the LCMS run. So rather than using some of the other methodologies that are currently being used, where you may have specific methods, this would actually encompass using the mass spec for one method to screen for all of the attributes that you may need to monitor.
Okay. And how does swath compare to MSC or AIF instruments?
You'd have to, that's a bit of a sort of like a vague question. Swath, because it actually gives you windows, you can do XICs of the data and actually have a look at the data itself. And the way that it's set up, you can my understanding with MSC is that you can't actually look at the data specifically, whereas in swath you can actually extract the MS and the MSMS data and have a look at it yourself. So it's a little bit more open. And I cannot comment about the AIF for thermo because I don't have any information on that, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, thank you, Sabile.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone, for your attention today.
And just to let you know, the recorded version of this webcast will be available for on-demand viewing on our website, and as a registered attendee, you will receive a follow-up email providing you with a direct link We look forward to having you join us at future BioProcess International Ask the Expert webcasts. Look for those announcements in your inbox. Thanks again.